Look, I don't fucking want to sit down! You do not tell me when to sit down! You do not control what I fucking... Look at me now! You do not control what I do in my life! Get that in that fucking little head of yours!
We all watched Adolescence, we praised it, we dissected it, we applauded the performances, the tension, the moral weight. But tell me something. What if the kid had confessed in the very first episode? No mystery, no psychological unraveling, just a blunt, immediate, I did it. Would we still feel the same? Or would the entire conversation collapse under the weight of what comes next? A real-time, one-take psychological drama that traps us inside the aftermath of a brutal act, forcing us to sit with guilt, responsibility, and the thin line between a damaged child and a dangerous mind. And today, we're going to dissect what would have happened if the child hadn't taken 4 episodes to accept his crime. Could we, as a society, choose rehabilitation and psychological intervention over automatically rooting for 14 years in custody? The moment a 14-year-old confesses in episode 1, the entire architecture of the story changes. There is no investigative suspense, no slow burn of doubt, no guessing game about whether he is lying, manipulated, or misunderstood. The acquisition phase becomes psychological, not procedural. We are no longer acquiring evidence about what happened. We are acquiring evidence about who he is. Because once the crime is admitted, the question shifts from did he do it to what made him capable of doing it. And that is far more uncomfortable. Legally, the system would still move. A confession does not cancel due process. It triggers it faster. He would still be processed as a juvenile. There would still be hearings, assessments, evaluations. The state would still prioritize public safety. But socially, the air would feel different. When a child resists, denies, manipulates, we harden. When a child admits, something in us softens, even if we do not want it to. This is where the psychiatrist becomes central. In the original trajectory, their role is to extract truth. In this alternate version, the truth is already on the table. So what does the psychiatrist acquire instead? Motive, emotional structure, cognitive distortions, trauma history, attachment patterns, exposure to violence, online radicalization, peer influence, family dynamics, neurological development. The confession becomes a doorway, not an ending. Research in juvenile justice repeatedly shows that adolescents have underdeveloped impulse control and heightened emotional reactivity. The prefrontal cortex is not fully matured. Decision-making is volatile. That does not erase responsibility, but it complicates it. The acquisition phase would become a forensic map of how a child crosses a moral line, not to excuse, to understand. And here is the deeper layer. If he confesses immediately, we are forced to confront remorse sooner. Does he cry? Does he dissociate? Does he rationalize? Does he show shock at himself? Or is he disturbingly calm? Each reaction shapes public perception, because society does not just punish actions, it punishes attitudes. Now bring it down from theory to something painfully human. If he confessed in episode 1, imagine the next scene is not a courtroom. It's his house. His mother standing in the kitchen, the kettle still running because she forgot to turn it off. His father sitting on the edge of the sofa, staring at nothing. The Christmas decorations still in the attic. The neighbors' lights already glowing across the street. Would you still knock on their door on Christmas Eve? Would you still exchange cookies with them? Would your kids still be allowed to play in that driveway? Or would the house quietly become that house? Because this is the part we skip when we shout 14 years. The punishment does not land on one body. It spreads. Parents lose their social identity overnight. Siblings become the murderer's brother. Invitations disappear. Church pews feel colder. Neighbors whisper instead of wave. Now imagine this version. He confesses immediately. He cries. He cooperates. He enters intensive psychiatric care. Court mandates strict supervision, electronic monitoring, daily therapy, family counseling. He is not free, but he is not removed either, and the family must live publicly with that decision. Would you respect that or resent it? Because society is not just reacting to the crime, it is reacting to proximity. It is easy to support rehabilitation when it happens somewhere else. It is harder when it is happening next door while you're hanging lights on your porch. Ask yourself something brutally honest. If you saw that mother at the grocery store in December, would you see a grieving parent? Or the woman who raised a violent child? Would you allow empathy? Or would you punish her socially even if the system chose therapy over custody? That is the real emotional test. We talk about justice as if it is abstract. But justice lives on streets, in neighborhoods, at school gates, at holiday dinners. So if confession came in episode 1, and the system said, we will attempt rehabilitation under extreme psychiatric supervision, the real question is not whether the law allows it. The question is whether we would. This is where sympathy becomes dangerous territory. If he appears broken, we instinctively want repair. If he appears cold, we demand containment. But what if the coldness is shock? What if the calm is trauma response? The psychiatrist's job would be to acquire those distinctions before the legal machine labels him permanently. Now imagine the family dynamic. Instead of weeks of denial and courtroom build-up, the parents face immediate truth. Their grief is not stretched, it is detonated. The home becomes both a site of horror and potential rehabilitation. Could structured psychiatric supervision inside the home be explored? Intensive therapy, electronic monitoring, community safety plans, restorative justice conversations, victim-family mediation if appropriate. These models exist in certain jurisdictions for specific cases. They are controversial, they require immense oversight, but they challenge the default assumption that removal equals correction. The acquisition phase then becomes society gathering data on itself. Are we capable of holding two ideas at once, that what he did was brutal, and that he is still a developing human being? If he confesses in episode 1, the show stops being about catching guilt and starts being about measuring humanity. And that measurement might be far more unsettling than any 4-episode mystery. Here's where the conflict explodes. The second a 14-year-old confesses in episode 1, society splits into two camps. One side says, good, lock him away, protect everyone else. The other whispers something far more dangerous, he's still a child. And that whisper makes people uncomfortable. Because once guilt is confirmed, punishment feels clean. It feels decisive. 14 years in custody sounds like balance, brutal act, brutal consequence, case closed. But the real conflict is not legal, it is moral. If he admits the crime instantly, shows vulnerability, shows the capacity for remorse, are we punishing the act or freezing a developing brain into a permanent identity? We have seen this tension before on screen. Look at 13 Reasons Why. The show exploded because it forced viewers to confront teenage cruelty, mental health collapse, and the ripple effect of adolescent decisions. But notice something, even when characters make devastating choices, the narrative constantly circles back to context. Bullying, isolation, shame, family silence. The audience is never allowed to view them as fully formed villains. They are framed as teenagers inside a broken system. Now imagine if one of those boys had committed something undeniably violent and confessed immediately. Would we still search for context? Or would empathy evaporate the moment certainty arrived? Or take Euphoria. These are teenagers spiraling through addiction, rage, trauma, and impulsive behavior. The show makes us uncomfortable because it refuses to sanitize youth. But it also refuses to dehumanize them. We watch characters lie, manipulate, self-destruct. And yet, we understand that their brains are still forming, their identities unstable, their moral compasses under construction. If one of them crossed into irreversible violence and admitted it, would the conversation be about punishment alone or about what created that psychological fracture? Then there is Breaking Bad. Walter White confesses in fragments to himself and eventually to others. We witness the transformation from ordinary man to criminal. The audience spends seasons rationalizing his descent because we are shown the why: pride, ego, fear, illness, financial insecurity. Context does not excuse him, but it complicates him, and that complication is what keeps viewers hooked. If Walter had simply appeared in episode 1 and declared, "I am evil," there would be no moral wrestling. It is the psychological journey that traps us. Ambiguity preserves empathy. certainty threatens it. So if our 14-year-old had confessed in episode 1, the real test would not be legal. It would be psychological. Could viewers still engage with the why after the what is settled? Could society still invest in therapy, structured rehabilitation, and monitored reintegration if there is no suspense left to soften the blow? Because once guilt is confirmed, outrage feels clean. Outrage feels safe. Rehabilitation feels risky. And that is where the data becomes uncomfortable. In real juvenile justice systems, early admission of guilt combined with intensive therapeutic intervention often lowers repeat offense rates more effectively than long-term custodial punishment. Cognitive behavioral therapy, family-based treatment models, trauma-informed care, and structured reintegration programs show measurable reductions in recidivism. These are not abstract theories. They are documented outcomes across multiple jurisdictions. So now the conflict sharpens. If evidence shows that psychological intervention reduces future harm, but public emotion demands visible punishment, which path actually protects society more? Do we choose safety through healing, even if it feels morally unsatisfying? Or do we choose safety through removal because it feels proportionate? This is the part we rarely admit. People often root for custody not because it guarantees better outcomes, but because it satisfies our instinct for symmetry. Harm was done, therefore harm must be returned in equal measure. It feels balanced, it feels final. But psychology does not operate on symmetry. It operates on disruption and repair. And that is the uncomfortable crossroads. Once confession removes the mystery, all that remains is our willingness or unwillingness to see a developing human brain behind an irreversible act. So here's the verdict. And it's not comfortable. If the child had confessed in episode 1, the real trial would not be his. It would be ours. Because once guilt is undeniable, we lose our favorite shield, doubt. Doubt lets us stay humane. Doubt lets us say, maybe. But confession forces a harder question. Can you still believe in rehabilitation when you are certain he did it? Let's break this psychologically. First, retributive psychology. This is the instinct that says punishment restores balance. Someone caused pain, they must experience pain. It is ancient, it feels clean, it feels morally symmetrical. The brain loves symmetry, it reduces cognitive dissonance. If he suffers for 14 years, the equation feels solved. But is it solved? Or is it simply emotionally satisfied? Second, protective psychology. This one says, remove the threat, contain it. Society must feel safe, even if he is 14, even if his brain is still developing. Safety over complexity. This mindset prioritizes certainty. No risk, no experiment, just distance. Now here is the third psychology, developmental psychology. This one is harder to sit with. It asks whether a 14-year-old is a fixed identity or a fluid one. Neuroscience tells us adolescence is marked by impulsivity, heightened emotion, and incomplete executive function. That does not erase accountability, but it raises a brutal question. Are we freezing someone at their worst moment, or allowing the possibility that the worst moment is not their final form? And then there is restorative psychology, the most controversial of all. It asks whether repair is possible, not just for him, but for the ecosystem around him. Could structured psychiatric care at home, under strict supervision, with mandatory therapy, monitoring, and community safeguards, produce a different outcome than institutional custody? Would remorse grow stronger in an environment of confrontation and guided reflection, or in one of isolation and stigma? You might immediately feel resistance. Good. That resistance is data. That is your moral reflex firing. But ask yourself this. If data shows that early accountability combined with intensive therapeutic intervention reduces repeat harm more effectively than long custodial sentences, are we choosing what works or what feels right? And here is the uncomfortable twist. Sometimes, doing what's legally correct is not the same as doing what is psychologically effective. Law is built on precedent and deterrence. Psychology is built on plasticity and intervention. Those systems do not always align neatly, so challenge yourself. If he is 14 and confesses immediately, shows capacity for remorse, engages in treatment, demonstrates measurable psychological change over years, would you still insist on maximum custody purely for proportionality? If your answer is yes, ask why. Is it safety or is it symbolic balance? And if your answer is no, ask yourself something even harder. Are you prepared to accept the risk that comes with rehabilitation? Because rehabilitation is not emotionally guaranteed. It demands faith in change. It demands patience. It demands oversight. It demands society to hold complexity instead of closure. The real question is not whether he deserves sympathy. The question is whether we are mature enough as a society to differentiate between vengeance and prevention. If he confessed in episode 1, the mystery disappears, but the moral mirror gets clearer, and what you see in that mirror might say more about us than it ever did about him. So maybe the most uncomfortable version of this story isn't the crime, it's the possibility of change. If he confessed in episode 1, the mystery would vanish, but the mirror would stay. And in that mirror is a question none of us can dodge. Do we actually believe in rehabilitation, or do we just say we do until it feels too close to home? Justice is easy to cheer for when it looks like punishment. It's harder when it looks like therapy, supervision, slow rebuilding. So tell me honestly, if it were your neighbor's house, what would you choose?